Hi, everyone. I hope all of you are well. Thank you for being here today. I am Lorena Hakak, and together with Solange Gonçalves, we are two of the coordinators of the study group on family and gender economics, GeFam, and we are going to mediate this webinar. The webinar will be divided in two parts. In the first part is the presentation of our guest, and then we will open for questions and answers. Attendees can send questions through the Zoom, or in the end, they can do the questions themselves. Well, today we are pleased to receive and welcome Julia Hatamyar. She will present her work about job mobility and gender using LinkedIn data. Shall we get to know our guest better? Julia Hatamyar is a fifth-year PhD candidate at the University of Miami, specializing in labor economics, gender and race, and law and economics. A former concert pianist, she performed extensively in the New York City area and taught undergraduate keyboard at New York University before switching careers. She also holds a professional certification in machine learning. She's currently on the job market, seeking a postdoctoral research position. Hi, Julia.
Hi. Thank you for the lovely introduction. Yeah.
Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm reading again the introduction, and then I understand why you're talking about job mobility. You switched career.
Yes, so maybe not occupational mobility that I'm looking at, but yes, very mobile.
Yeah. Okay. So when you're ready, you can share and begin your presentation.
Okay, great. So as I said, thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to getting the feedback from this group on my paper on job mobility and gender, looking at evidence from divorce laws in the United States. I'm from University of Miami. If anyone has any questions, feel free to speak up during the presentation. I don't mind. If you'd rather not wait until the end, that's fine with me, whatever you prefer. So, is it going here? Great. Okay, so this paper is motivated, right, as a lot of these papers are, by the fact that women are still more likely to exit the workforce, and we have this statistical discrimination in the workforce where women are less likely to be promoted because the firm thinks this woman is more likely to leave, so we're not going to promote her. And specifically what is interesting to me is these MBA women who go and get this often very expensive degree, and a large portion of them 10 years after obtaining this degree are dropping out of the labor force. So this was sort of puzzling to me. Why would you spend this time and this money on this education if you are just going to be leaving the workforce? So related to that, there is a lot of difference in gender job mobility. So we know that when women switch jobs, they continue to experience less wage growth. So they do obtain wage growth, but they experience less wage growth. And it's been found that most women move for family-related reasons. So in the 90s, men were considered more mobile than women, and highly educated women, so women at this end of the education spectrum, they maybe moved around at the same rate. However, in recent years, there's some anecdotal evidence from industry where people are saying that women now are self-selecting into these industries with higher rates of mobility in the industry, and could be moving around more than men on average in recent years. So this is important for us to know, right? Is this true? Can we find this out as researchers ourselves and not have to rely on this LinkedIn chief economist's information, right? So from the firm's perspective, When you see a woman leaving your firm, you don't know if she's dropping out of the labor market entirely, if she's just going to stay home, or if she's moving to switch to another job. So we need to know if the reasons that the woman is switching jobs are the same reasons that would lead her to drop out of the workforce, because otherwise the firm is going to have a biased perception about what this woman is doing when they see her leave her current job. So that could exacerbate statistical discrimination. So that's the main motivation here. And from the firm's perspective, again, these reasons for leaving the workforce are unobserved, right? So in the US, we're not allowed to ask about the marriage situation or the children's situation in the home as an employer. So they don't really know if the woman has these is married or has children, and it's an unobserved information, hidden information to that firm. So there are these two reasons why women generally leave the workforce. So one of them is high earning spouses, right? So you're going to have a higher reservation wage. You're not going to want to work if you're going to be getting a lot of money from your spouse. And then there are also the children in the home. So when you have an increased childcare responsibility, women are known to stay home with the children. So there are these two sort of household aspects that the firm does not get to observe. And my approach to this is to use divorce laws as a proxy for these two options. So I look at asset distribution in the case of divorce, where there's variation by state in terms of how the assets are distributed among the divorcing people. And then I look at child custody, where there's variation in the states in terms of, does the mother get the children, or is it a more equal division of the child custody? And I'm going to explain those laws in more detail in a minute. So my research question, motivated by all of this, is conditional on remaining in the labor market. How do these household options affect the job mobility by gender? So we know sort of how these things influence dropping out of the workforce, but we want to know, how do they affect job mobility, and especially for this strange segment of the workforce that's so highly educated and very likely to leave the workforce. So just as a preview of my results, what I find is that female MBAs are much more likely to switch jobs. They have increased job mobility if they are less likely to receive spousal assets in the case of divorce. And I actually find no effect of the maternal custody on job mobility. So if that's proxying for an increased presence of children in the home, I find no effect of this on the job mobility of female MBAs.
Julia, may I ask you a question?
Yes.
A quick question.
Sure.
Do you have information on the job, of the old job and new job of the people?
Yeah, so I'm going to explain my data in a minute. So I have the current job, I have a lot of information about that, and then I just have a count of the old jobs. It was a very time-consuming data collection process, but yes, I will explain all of the data in a minute. Yeah.
Okay. No, I was just curious that the type of the job changes depending on the.
Yes, I will show you an example of how I collected that information exactly. So in a minute. Okay, so as we were discussing earlier, we can sort of think about what's going on here. If we assume that when a woman switches jobs, she's done it after looking for a job, and that she's trying to get an increased wage, right? So the assumption, the longstanding assumption in the search literature is that when you switch a job, you do so to get an increased wage. So if we take that assumption and we think, when we see the women in my data set and the men in my data set, we see them switch jobs, we assume that they are trying to increase their wage, or that they're going to get a new wage at that job. Then we can apply just a very simple on-the-job search model to understand what's going on and how the assets and the children in the home interact with this model. So in these very, very simple models, right, the woman or the worker can search for a new job while they're employed. and they're going to accept the offer when the wage is higher than their reservation wage, their search reservation wage. So I'm not talking about switching into employment out of unemployment. I'm just talking about people on the job who are employed and looking for work. So they're going to have this search wage, which is the wage, the lowest amount that they're going to accept to move to a new position. Okay, and then we have this arrival rate of job offers, which is going to be proportional to the search effort that you make when you're looking for jobs. And the cost of the search is going to be an increasing function of that effort, because search is considered to be costly in terms of time or resources. So in the optimal search, and I'll show you, I can show you the model if you want to see the first order conditions. In the optimal search condition, right, we search with the marginal cost of searching equal to the marginal return to the effort of searching. And we want to see, how do these household options, how do they interplay here with this optimality condition? So I will just show you, I'm not going to go too much into the math here, but we can see here the workers maximizing that search effort, maximizing S, right? They're trying to get this lifetime value of their work, and they're maximizing, here we have the wage minus that costly search and this arrival rate of offers, where if they get this job WX, which is above their current wage, right, they're going to have this benefit from search. So we have this first order condition. Here's exactly what I showed you, the marginal benefit of the search and the marginal costs of the search equated. So we can easily here put these two assets and children into the first order condition to see how they affect the marginal benefit and the marginal cost of search. So my first hypothesis is that when we have a decreased assets, we have an increased benefit from search, right? The less money that you have, the better it's going to be for you if you find a job where it pays you more. Right, so this is kind of an inverse relationship with this alpha, right? So when we have this increased search benefit from alpha, right, it's going to show that our optimal search intensity is increasing. And then for the cost of children, kappa, so the second hypothesis is that this enters the optimal search condition as part of the search cost. And this is actually longstanding in the search literature as well. It's hypothesized that women have higher opportunity costs of search because of the children at home, or they have to spend more time on the housework and all of that, which is well known in the literature. So here we see this negative relationship, right, which makes sense. Your optimal search intensity is going to decrease as the cost of search increase. So this is very simple, but we can think about, sorry. Sorry about that. Of course, I should have put them in there, but I wasn't sure how much I wanted to get into the model. Sorry about that. Okay, so here we show the optimal search intensity, marginal cost of searching, and marginal return to the efforts of searching are going to be equal to each other. So here is that alpha condition, right? When we had the decrease in the search benefit, you're going to search less, right? So women with higher, this is sort of the opposite of what I was saying, but it's equivalent, right? The women with a lot of money from their spouse are going to have less gains from search, right? Why bother looking for a better wage if my husband is a millionaire, something like that. Okay, so it reduces the benefit from search. So this leads to that first hypothesis here in words, where women, if they're more likely to get marital assets, they're going to move jobs less often, right? And same thing here, women more likely to be the only caregiver to their children. I hypothesize that they're also going to switch jobs less. And then what happens if you are a mother in both of these states, right? If you have both assets from your husband and children, right? This is going to reduce, both of those are going to reduce the effort. So the third hypothesis is that these women are likely to switch jobs the least, right? Because they have the lower search effort than just those two conditions individually. So this is very related to another paper by Bertrand, Claudia Golden, and Katz. And this is a survey of MBAs, I believe, from University of Chicago. And they show in the survey, based on responses from these MBAs, that the impact of children on female labor supply of these MBAs is very related to the spousal income. So If the woman has children and her husband earns a lot of money, she's going to be much more likely to drop out. However, if they don't have children, right, the money from as their spouse earns more, they tend to actually work more. So this might be like a marital matching story going on here. So I'm interested in, what does this impact the relationship between the income and the children? Can we separate them, and what happens to them together in terms of job mobility? So we know that there's this presence of children means that women are more likely to drop out of the labor force, as I said earlier. But again, why am I looking at MBAs? Well, the largest gap that we see between these graduates of very selective schools, think like Harvard and MIT and all these top ranked schools, is in MBAs, of these elite graduates who drop out of the workforce. So I believe that MBAs, it's a very promising area to look and see what's going on. So contributing to that MBA literature, this is looking at job mobility, which is there's little research on. And then most of these papers looking at MBAs, they only have data from one school. So the authors are able to obtain access to do surveys of the MBAs who graduated from their school, right? Where I actually have hundreds of schools in my data set. And we need some sort of causal evidence of just these responses on the surveys. So that's one reason for my creating of my data set. So I create my data manually going to LinkedIn.com. So LinkedIn, I'm sure you know, but I'll say it's sort of a social network for finding jobs. So it's like a professional social network where workers put their resume, their CV on LinkedIn, and firms also have their own pages, and they can recruit workers, or workers can connect with each other and sort of find new job openings. So it's really a job search platform. And now I think labor economists are really starting to see that this data can be very useful to us. There are a couple of papers that are starting to use the data. And actually just recently, LinkedIn lost a lawsuit in the United States. So the court here found that any resume, any information on LinkedIn, LinkedIn does not own that data. So if the person put their web page and set it as public, so that it's a public web page, that data can be used by a third party, as long as it's not being used for monetary gain or something like that. So that's actually great for me, because it means LinkedIn can't come after me and say, hey, you can't use our data because this judge just ruled that it's not their data if the user has made it public. So I have hand collected this LinkedIn data, and as far as I know, it's the first paper to use the data to study female labor market behavior specifically, and job mobility. And again, I'm going to go more into how I collect that data. So now we have this literature on divorce laws in the United States, which I'm sure many of you know. It's very related to the family economics literature. We know that divorce laws impact labor participation of women. That's been long discussed in the literature. And my contribution is, I believe that this is the first paper to show there's a relationship between job mobility and these types of divorce laws. So not only the participation decision, but how people are switching their jobs as well. So there are existing papers looking at exactly these two types of divorce laws, the property distribution laws. This is a very, very well-known paper, right? They're found to influence consumption and saving decisions of couples, of married couples. And then here's a newer paper looking at educational outcomes and these custody law differences in the United States. So I told you I would get more into my data, and here we go. So hand collecting these resumes from LinkedIn, there are over 3,000 resumes. There are over 3 million MBAs on LinkedIn.com. And someone asked me about selection issues. Actually, there are about 150,000 MBA graduates every year. So for there to be 3 million MBAs, you have a pretty good representative sample of all of these graduates from the last couple of decades. Most MBAs are sort of required in their school to establish a LinkedIn profile, and they'll have courses or seminars just in how to use LinkedIn. So there's a huge incentive for MBAs to be on LinkedIn. And it's not like they're just taking their information off LinkedIn if they're not employed. They indicate in their resume, right? If they're looking for a job. So if there was any worker that said something like, I'm open to new opportunities, or I am searching for a job in this specific area, then it was very easy for me to just drop those workers from the data set and just keep people who had remained employed throughout their resume. So I collect the gender, their location, their current employer and their current positions. And then I go through and I count the number of firms and the number of positions at which they have worked. And I'm going to show you an example. I classify manually their occupation using information in their profiles. And then of course, I need to control for how long people have been working, right? Because that's going to determine how many jobs you have. So any profile that did not list the first job and the exact year that it began, those also had to be dropped from the data set. So this is actually a very time-consuming process. I believe each observation took on average like 8 to 10 minutes, each one of these. So I was very lucky through my department and the management department at University of Miami to get some funding to hire Amazon MTurk workers to assist me in collection of the data so I could get it done in a more timely fashion. So here's an example of a LinkedIn page. So you can see at the top of the profile, there is the position, right? So this is the professor of finance and vice dean is the position at Miami Herbert Business School. So this is their current place of employment. And here is the location. So this was very easy to just sort of copy and paste. And then I will show you how the counts were done. So LinkedIn makes it, actually, it's very clear here. You can see each of these top rows, right, is the different firms, and then they have smaller bullet points, right, that list individual positions within those firms. So I have the count of firms, which would just be these, you know, these first jobs, or these first lines on the different sections, and then the count of the positions underneath that. So as I classified the employees into different occupations, you can see that they are consistent with what we know about most MBAs. So most MBAs are going to work in management, in consulting, in finance, and in marketing. And those are the ones that we see here.
Mm-hmm. Julia, can I ask you a question?
Sure, of course.
You have up to 3 million MBAs, people with MBA at LinkedIn, isn't it? Well, but your data is with 3,041. How did you reduce this?
So these were just individual resumes that I myself and the people that I hired were able to find. So I would love to have, you know, closer to 3 million than just 3,000, of course, but because it was just such a time-consuming process to go through and to classify everything and collect all the information. So most of the time, what I just told these workers on Amazon MTurk, I said, find a public profile of an MBA. Okay, someone that has an MBA, and it has to say when they graduated, it has to say where, and I gave them the list of the requirements, and then they just went and they searched on their own, which actually helps with selection bias also, because sometimes LinkedIn only shows you people that sort of know other people that you know. So by hiring hundreds of workers, I actually got around that selection bias because they were able to log in and see, you know, people that I maybe would not have seen on the first page of the search results. But yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, through a search process.
Julia, just to complement Lorena's question, how many resumes are public in LinkedIn, just to have an idea?
That's also a good question. So I don't know the specific number, but my impression is that it's a large majority of them, because people want to have that information out there for job recruiters to potentially reach out to them or potentially share their information. So actually, I think I only experienced maybe 10% of them that were private. Maybe 10–15%. So I don't have an exact count for you on that, but it was very unusual, much more unusual for a profile to be private than it is to be public. It's a good question also. Yes.
Thank you.
So also on LinkedIn, these firms have a lot of incentive to have their own page on LinkedIn where they put information about what they do, and they put job openings and this sort of thing. So they put an indicator for different firm sizes on their page, right? And these are non-uniform buckets of firm size, right? The smallest firms would be like 2 to 10, and then 10 to 50, 50 to 250, things like that. So they're non-uniform. So I had to create just binary indicators for whether a firm was a specific size in those buckets, which I will show you again, the LinkedIn page, and then manually matching each person's resume, going to the LinkedIn page and collect the information. And then I also went to the firm's page to get an industry indicator from the firm, just in case there was some effect of maybe I have a worker who's in finance, but they're working at a marketing firm or something like that, just to do some robustness tests or have other control definitions. So here you can see this is a Business Insider's LinkedIn page. So Business Insider actually put this page up themselves. So they would have written everything themselves here, and they put their industry. They put their industry as this classification, and then they put their current company size, right? So that's this top number, and the bottom number is how many people are on LinkedIn who have ever worked at Business Insider. So unfortunately, LinkedIn does not allow web scraping. So wouldn't this just be amazing if we were able to run some code and scrape all of this data, because there's so much information that we can get from privately held firms that we don't have access to. However, they very much say in all of their legal agreements, you're not allowed to do that, which is why it was such a time-consuming process for me to go through manually and have to collect all of this by hand. So it would be amazing if we could scrape. I think this would be an amazing resource for us, but unfortunately we don't have that. But the good news is I was able to use information, especially about things like firm size, from private firms, which is very important because we know that women generally tend to prefer smaller firms. So that was very important for me to control for. Okay, and then I also manually match each worker to the ranking of their MBA school. So I used the 2019 US World News Report and manually classified each school with their ranking. And then the United States, the Status of Women in the States report has state variation or state information on the participation rates, the gender wage gap, cost of childcare by average in each state, which is very important. And then, of course, I have to control for the marriage and divorce rates in each state. So for the divorce laws that I use in this paper, the property laws in the United States, there are two different kinds. So there are community property law states, which is where the assets are generally distributed just right in half. So all of the property in the marriage is just cut straight in half. And generally in the economics literature and the legal literature, we understand that this type of state is going to transfer a larger share to the wives, because most of the time the husband earns more in the marriage, and that if you cut it right in half, the wife is going to get a larger share. The other type of divorce property law is equitable distribution, and this is loosely, according to the judge, whoever earned the asset, whoever earned whatever the property is in the marriage is going to be the one who keeps them after the divorce. And so when these equitable distribution laws were introduced in the 1970s, it was supposed to help women obtain more of their husband's assets in the case of divorce, but actually it sort of had the opposite effect. And there's no evidence in the legal literature that they reduce the share of the husband's assets at all. And in all of the literature, it's actually the other type of state, the community property law state, where we assume that the wives are going to get more of the marital property. So now for the custody laws, the best interest of the child standards, these are actually international standards for determining the best interest of who takes care of a child in the case of divorce. And it's this long list of standards where every state in the United States has sort of gone through the list and picked which ones they want to use in their law. And most states are going to use these factors, this list of factors. So in the legal literature, again, it has been found that there are certain factors that are very likely to result in maternal custody being awarded, in the mother getting the child. So when a judge is making the decision and they're consulting the law, and it says something like, provides full emotional support to the child, that person should get the child. The judge is going to be much more likely to rely on their bias about, who do they think maybe it provides emotional support. The culture bias is that that's going to be the mother. So in those states, it's been found that judges are much more likely to be biased and to award sole maternal custody. So I went through all 50 states and read these statutes, coding them as in the legal literature as they are identified. And in the paper, you can see the specific actual statutes themselves if you want to just take a look and see what those look like. So here we have the purple, the community property law states, and the orange is where the maternal custody is likely. So hopefully, if you know the American geography a little bit, it's very different in, say, Arkansas and Alabama as it is in New York in terms of culture, in terms of politics, in terms of gender norms, that sort of thing. So I don't believe there's any sort of geographic effect really going on here in terms of why is there endogeneity of why certain states have these laws in place. There's a lot of distribution, and you can see there's 2 states where both laws, you're more likely to get husband's assets and more likely to be having sole maternal custody. So for those outcome variables I showed you on the LinkedIn page, I'm looking at the number of firms on a resume, number of positions on a resume, and then this rate of positions per firm to loosely capture maybe promotion. So here just to show you the control variables, right? And these are all, there's a lot of variation, so they're obviously important to be used as controls. So again, CL state is the community property, so more likely to get the husband's assets, and BIOC, or best interest of the child state, is more likely to get the children after the divorce. So we can see here there's a good very close relationship to just the overall sample average for many of these things. However, maybe what's important, right, to control for those childcare costs, which are higher in states where women are more likely to get custody, which I found interesting, which I hadn't seen mentioned in the legal literature anyway. So that's interesting. And then you can see there's very similar in terms of marriage and divorce rates, and maybe the number of elite graduates that they have. But again, all of these things are going to be controlled for. And then looking at the gender treatment, the outcome variables by gender, we see very similar number of firms and positions. And actually just looking at the numbers, it looks like men work at more firms and hold more positions, right? Which we'll see is maybe not the case. So here is where I ran into a little bit of a problem. So when I'm looking at the community property law states versus the equitable distribution states, there is, when I run the Mann-Whitney U-test of the distributional comparison, there is a significant difference in the distribution of these count variables. So I address that by also running a propensity score matched regressions. So I believe that I'd sort of take care of that in that robustness check, which we'll go through. And then there's no significant difference in mean and median for the maternal custody likely states when we're looking at these outcome variables. So as you can see, I just wanted to show you here, right, why I need to use negative binomial regression instead of a Poisson regression, because there's a much wider variance than the mean. Mean and variance are clearly not equal here. So hopefully I convince you of this for both the firms, number of firms and the number of positions, right? We have a very large dispersion here. So I need to use the negative binomial regression instead of the Poisson. So the formal test also rule it out, but I think anyone just looking at that would it's very clear, right? This is not going to be a Poisson regression, and zero truncated because by definition, everyone's held at least one job in my data set. So there's nobody in my data set that's never had a job before. So nobody has a 0 on their resume. And so it has to be a zero truncated. So as the first model that I want to look at is just the effect of gender on job mobility. So on the number of firms, the number of positions. So this is just a very simple baseline regression. And then I'm going to look at the effect of the divorce laws individually. So here, state would be the specific divorce law regime. So is it the community property state or is it the custody likely state? And I estimate these both separately. And then I also estimate the two simultaneously, right, where I have a triple interaction term. This is going to be looking at hypothesis 3, right, which is that combined effect of getting the spousal assets and the children. So here,
May I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Do people change a lot of municipality and state within the job changes?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I tried as best as I could to make sure that people were staying in the same geographic area. So there might be a few people in the data sets. Actually, the most likely to be moving around are academics. So those few MBAs who go on to get a PhD, those are the most likely to be moving around. But most of the time when people start their career in a certain location, they're going to stay there. So I have a lot of workers in California, a lot in Chicago, a lot in New York, a lot in Washington. I did make sure I did compare distributionally to sort of population and labor market centers across the United States to make sure that I have representative sample from all 50 states in the United States. But most of the time after obtaining an MBA, when they start their career, they're going to stay in the same area. So that is a good question. And the one exception to that was, I guess, people like us, people that are willing to move around to different universities. So, but thank you. Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so just looking at the effect of only being a female, right? We can see that, so this is average marginal effects, by the way. This is not the raw coefficient. This has been delta transformed into the marginal effects. So we see that women hold maybe 1/3 more jobs, and this is the count, right? And maybe close to 1/2 more positions than men in the data set. But now, when we start incorporating the different types of divorce laws, we see that this effect is mostly driven by only certain ones of these divorce regimes. So here, we see the effect for females is only significant for women who are not in the states. So this is women in the equitable distribution states, which means they are less likely to get assets from their husbands. They are much more likely to be moving jobs, right? So that's reduced marginal benefit from job search, right? Or sorry, increased marginal benefit from job search when you reduce the amount of assets that you're going to get, right? You're going to be more likely to get a better wage, or that's going to be better for you if you have less money from your husband. So you're going to be switching positions and switching firms more. So mostly the effect is position changes, right? And then I see no significant effect here for the women in that community property state. So this would be women who are likely to get assets. So the sign is negative, as we would expect, right? But I don't actually see a significant effect. And last time I presented this paper, people were asking me about, don't you have to add these coefficients together? Well, when you do the average marginal effect transformation, right, it does that sort of automatically for you. So this is calculated the significance, right, and the treatment indicators being 1 for both of these together. This is not just the raw coefficients. Okay, so we can interpret this as women in the states, and this is women not in the state, women in the equitable distribution state, which is less likely to get assets. So I just wanted to clarify that because the last time I presented this paper, I had a bit of confusion on that. So yes. And now if we look at the effect of custody, right? So are women more likely to get maternal custody of their children? And you can see that the effect on job mobility actually completely disappears for women. Once that is taken into account, or once we split that up. And we actually see that in these states where mothers are more likely to get the children, it's the men who are much more likely to be moving around. So maybe the men have reduced costs of job search because they have much less responsibility to take care of their children in those states, and they're moving around a lot. And then here, this is exactly what we would expect from hypothesis 3, right? So women who are more likely to get money from their husband and more likely to have the children at home, they move around a lot less, okay? So they hold almost 2 or 1.5 fewer jobs, right, than other women in the sample. However, I do caution that, remember I showed you that map, there's only 2 states in the United States where this applies. So maybe I don't discuss these results as much as I do the other results, because I don't know, can we really interpret this if it's only 2 states? However, it's reassuring to me that we do see that significant negative effect as we would, as the model predicts. So now I'm going to go through a bunch of different robustness tests and subsamples that I do to sort of get at some common concerns that I've had when presenting this paper. So one question is, were these results being driven by the quality of education, right? And this is also important because those other papers found that this effect is very strong for these elite graduates in terms of dropping out of the labor force. So because I have graduates from over 500 programs, I'm able to restrict them to these top ranked schools, the 100 top ranked, and then I can also include the actual ranking as a regressor. So we would expect a negative coefficient on there, right? Because the lower the number, the higher ranked the school, right? So I can actually look at whether there's some result here in terms of these top schools, and it allows me to compare to these prior papers just on participation. So the main result is that I find that the effect is much stronger for women from these top MBA programs. So women who are less likely to get their husband's assets and they are at these top schools are going to switch jobs and positions almost twice as much as the women in the whole sample. Okay, and then I also find that that effect on men is no longer there. So that effect of men in the maternal custody states. So here we actually see the table, right? So again, this is women in the equitable distribution state. So women that are not going to get their husband's assets. And you can see these are really moving around. My interpretation of this is that these women have much lower search costs. Because if you have an MBA from maybe Harvard or MIT and you're staying in the labor market, it's going to be probably very easy for you when you apply to a job. The person just sees your resume and they see, oh, she's from Harvard, right? It might take you much less time. You don't have to apply to 200 different places, right? Or maybe you're even being, recruited based on your resume. So I interpret this as this makes a lot of sense, right? Because they have reduced search cost and they're going to have this increased benefit from search when they have the reduced assets from their husband in these states. And again, here, I see no effect anymore on the men, the maternal custody. So maybe the effect of the children on the costs of search, it's not there. One from these top schools. And the women as a whole, the women move around more, but again, this seems to be only driven by these women that are not getting their marital property. So now, maybe this is very relevant to your seminar series. Okay, so a main question that I kept getting is, are female MBAs just trying to find a family-friendly workplace, right? So how do you know, maybe they're looking for, you're not controlling for this, and you're going to see an effect of the property laws once you start looking at whether they're looking for a larger share of female managers, they want to work with more women, or they want to have, like a daycare in their office. So I address this concern in 2 ways. So I look at workers in the occupations that are male dominated, because the opposite, when an occupation is female dominated or has a larger share of women, this is much more likely to have family friendly policies. So there's one way of looking at it. And then I also, I created a dummy variable for female friendly firms. This was another very time consuming process, but I kept getting this question. So I use this firm Equileap. They have a process by which they rank, they score companies in terms of their gender equality practices. So what's your parental leave policy? Do you have daycare? How many women are managers? That sort of thing. So anyone in this ranking, right, is what I counted as sort of female friendly. They actually have just as an aside, they have, I think, thousands and thousands of firms that they've scored, but they would not give me that data unless I paid them a lot of money. So maybe for some of you, if you want to use this data, you can get some funding. I think it would be very, very useful. And then another way that I find female-friendly firms is that some of these firms, they really advertise the skilled women. They advertise that they have on-site daycare or their parental leave, maybe on LinkedIn or on Glassdoor. They say something about it. So I went through looking through these firms and seeing if I could find some sort of mention of this to create this variable for female-friendly firms. And I believe it was about 20% of my sample, 20% of the firms in the sample that were considered more female-friendly. So
yeah. May I ask you another question?
Yes,
Sorry.
Of course.
Are there regional differences in maternal and parental leave in the US?
That's a good question. I also controlled for that. Actually, the only state really that has policies for paid maternal leave is California. So I controlled for, I think for in the state, it was allowed to influence maternity leave, but that's really only California that it's going to apply to. So
and in Brazil, for example, the public firms, they have much longer maternal leaves than private firms. Is that
the private firms?
Yeah.
That's very interesting. Yeah, here it's basically just up to the firm. So these top firms, especially, you know, firms like Amazon or Google, they're going to be advertising like, hey, we actually have really good maternity leave policy to try to maybe recruit women to come work at those firms. But it's really, it's up to the firm. It's only California, I think, where women can get paid up to a large percent. So nationwide, I think you can get like 40% of your wage, but only if your firm is very large. So controlling for the firm size should take care of that. And also I do have that Family Medical Leave Act control, which is the law that the Family and Medical Leave Act was the national law that was passed that certain states use in terms of their maternity policies. So yes, that's another great question. Yes. So
how much do the firms in California they pay for the maternity leave? Well, it depends on of the
I
firm.
think like the length might depend on the firm. I think they might be required to do 2 weeks fully paid, which is like very little. I mean, the US is ranked, I mean, we're ranked like 50th in the world in terms of our paid maternity policy. It's very, very low. So even for that Family Medical Leave Act, I believe the large companies, when they're being used, they only have to pay 40% of the wage and you only get 2 weeks. So most women, when they have a baby, they have to go back after only 2 weeks or they risk not getting any money. So very short maternity leave policies, yes.
But they can, for example, they can stay away from their job for 1 month or 2 without receiving any paycheck, but then they can return or they get fired.
That also depends on the firm, right? So it depends on the specific firm. I think many lower wage jobs, they're going to get fired. I think for women in my sample, like the MBAs that are at the upper end of the education and the wage, just a job waiting for them. Yes, if they want to take 3 months and not get paid back to their job, but they're not much. And I have the other paper in my dissertation is looking at workplace breastfeeding policies. And I sort of discuss the differences in the maternity leave policies in that paper as well. So there's really not very much maternity paid in this country, regardless of where you live. So depends on your job, depends on your company. So anyway, I went through a lot of trouble to create that dummy variable, right, to get this information, and I found it has absolutely no this is consistent with the story, right? If women, this effect of the children, this effect of the family is actually not influencing their job mobility decision. It's just that assets, that asset indicator. Right? And what I find is that in those male-dominated occupations, again, we have a stronger and more significant effect. However, we know that working in male-dominated occupations has a wage premium. And women who work in those occupations, actually, they have the smallest wage gap out of all the different sort of occupational gender segregations, right? They have the smallest wage gap. If you're in a very high-skilled job and you're in a male-dominated, going to be much easier for you to find a higher wage. So again, this is sort of an increased benefit from job search in that wage. So increased return to search, which we find through sort of the wealth or the asset channel and not through that family-friendly looking for those daycares or that maternity leave policy, maybe because it's very hard to actually find that in the United States, but right, so we also know that, yeah, so those women in male dominated firms. So here we see, right, again, these male-dominated firms, the women more likely to move jobs, I think, again, because they have that increased benefit from search if they're going to be paid more. And male-friendly, there's absolutely no effect, although there is a little bit of a negative sign, right? So maybe maybe reduces the moving around, but not significant at all. So that was very interesting. And so the answer to that question is no, they don't seem to be moving around to find these policies in their workplace. Okay, so as I showed you,
Can I ask you another question?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can you come back to your no, the
male-dominated?
Yes, this is in the panel A, female and firm change, position change. The positive effect is if you earn more assets from your husband.
If you have less.
And then
you have fewer assets. So the female is the women who have fewer. Yes. Because originally I thought the ones who earn more from their husband, these community property, I thought I'd for sure see them move less. But then I really found the effect was for women moving more if they don't have the assets. So it's the same finding, is just sort of reversed in terms of the wording of it. Yeah.
Okay. Now I understood. Okay, the sign. Okay, okay.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so yes, I talked about how long I have left. I talked about the distributions being a little bit different in terms of the treatment of those property laws. So I did a propensity score matching technique where I matched on that treatment of the property laws. And then I did use repeated controls just to make sure that I had a really well matched sample. So I had people concerned that maybe these workers who live in New York City are very different from people outside the country. This is really going to balance on all of the characteristics of those workers who might live in New York, right, which I think New York is an equitable distribution state, right, making sure that we're not just using only New York to determine these results of the females that are not receiving their husband's assets. Okay, so I did this propensity score match sample with the properly weighted repeated controls, and I find that the effect is still there. It's very large, and I also find what I expected now. So this was what you were asking, right? This is the women who are more likely to get their husband's assets. Now I do find them less likely to switch jobs. So I believe because this is a properly balanced and matched sample, I think this is some evidence that yes, that hypothesis one that really was correct here. It wasn't just being driven by New York, and we've taken care of the distributional differences now with that propensity score matching approach, right? And then we see again these are the women who do not get their husband's assets in the equitable distribution states. They're holding almost one more position and one more firm than men in those states. Okay, and then, okay, so yes, so just going through again, this household effect of these highly educated, high earning women, right, is mainly happening through the asset channel. The effect of children actually does not appear to be influencing the job mobility, maybe unless they get to a certain threshold of how their husband's assets are. But if you have you know, you just see a woman in your workplace and you assume that she's more likely just because of her kids to drop out, that is not going to be the case in terms of her likelihood to move around jobs. So there is a difference there in terms of those drivers of gendered job mobility differences versus the gendered participation decisions. Consistently, we find that the less likely to receive spousal assets, the more likely that MBA women are to switch jobs. And as I said, this is one of the first papers, as far as I've found, that shows a relationship between these divorce laws and job mobility. And then, yes, so the data limitations, I do, of course, this is sort of a cross-sectional count data. I would have loved to make this a panel data set, but I started trying to do that. And for each resume, it was taking me like 45 minutes, 1 hour just to make one resume into a panel form. However, now LinkedIn has started publishing these resumes as a PDF. So this is a new thing on LinkedIn, that if you click on the person's profile, there's a little button you can click to download their resume where they've formatted it as a PDF. So my goal for the future is to somehow, now we have all of these great machine learning, you know, these data reading techniques where they can actually read the PDF and put it into a table for me. So that was not the case. I started collecting this data in 2016. So that PDF option was not there at the time. So now I'm hoping I can really turn it into a panel data set in the future. I do other robustness tests where I'm looking at the most common MBA specializations, because people were saying, well, you know, maybe you have these weird occupations like healthcare or HR where they're much more likely to be women. So, you know, only look at marketing and management and finance and consulting. Like those are what MBAs usually do. So only look at those. The results are robust to that. And then I also go through and leave out, I ran, you know, 50 times and leaving out one state at a time to make sure that it wasn't just one state. So that was mostly true. I think just a couple of very small changes. And then again, I find this cost of childcare related to the male job mobility. So we know that it's related to female labor force decisions. But that was very interesting to me, right? Related to the males as well. Okay, and then, so what does this mean for the firm? So going back to the motivation of this paper, right? So it seems, based on my finding, that if we assume that women are moving to improve their wages, right, it seems that the turnover is not associated with the presence of children, but with this wealth effect. And we know that when women ask for raises, right, they're sometimes considered too aggressive, or they're less likely to be granted a wage. So they're less likely to ask for a wage in the first place. And then when they do ask, the person that they're asking is going to think, oh, this woman is so aggressive. Like, how dare she ask me for this raise? So, right, so from the firm, from a strategy perspective, perhaps, you know, analyze how those raises are given, because from the search literature, we know as your wage increases, the less likely you are to move jobs. So this will reduce the likelihood of the females moving around, right, assuming that they're going to stay in the labor force to begin with, right? So, and this is, again, work to improve the ability of female MBAs to negotiate their raises, and maybe they can start to sort of address some of this problem if they want to reduce the turnover costs. So that's all I have for you for today. Thank you so much for your attention and really good questions from everyone. And hopefully I get some more questions if anyone has any.
Anyone?
I have some questions, Julia.
Okay.
Anna, do you want to do?
No. Go ahead.
It's a simple question. Maybe I can I lose some points in your paper also, but it's possible that you have the same person doing a job-to-job transition in more than, for example, 2 times in your window. You are observing. It's a cross-sectional
Yes.
database, but there is an exclusion of people that do more than one job-to-job transition in this interval, in this window, or it's not necessary, this kind of
Not
treatment?
necessarily. No, there are people that just held one job the whole time.
Okay.
Yeah, just one job, one position. I get it, and I stay there. So
Okay, so
yeah.
you don't have one person doing more than one job-to-job transition in your.
I do. So there are people that have lots and people that have very few, and I control for the length of the time that they've been working.
Yeah, okay.
All specifications,
Okay.
right? Because if you've been working for 30 years, it's more likely that you're going to have more job-to-job transitions, right? So I have to control for that. So in all of these specifications, I've controlled for that. And it also controls for human capital accumulation as well
Okay.
to do that.
And you are interested only on job-to-job transition, voluntary job-to-job transitions, yeah, with a wage increase. Do you observe some involuntary job-to-job transitions in our database, and how this can be used in future for your job?
Yeah. So I tried my best to remove any of those observations. I wanted to be conditioned on people staying employed throughout their entire career. Right. So people on LinkedIn, they would indicate if they were not employed, and I would remove that from the data set. But there's a lot of, in the early search literature and empirical search literature,
Yeah.
there's a lot about like highly educated workers. They're very unlikely to do unemployment to job transitions. So most job transitions for this sector of the workforce are on the job transitions. It's very unlikely for them to be unemployed.
Okay, and the last question that I have, it's about the heterogeneity that you have for your sample. You have, do you have some family characteristics? For example, I don't know if you have a worker to control for some added worker effect or this kind of thing. If you have a teenager in our family, or no.
So that's the drawback of this data set, right? Compared to, say, if I wanted to use like the PSID or one of the more traditional data sets. So I wanted to really have a good sample of MBAs, which I'm not going to have in those traditional data sets, but I don't have information on their home situation. But
Okay.
in the United States, it's illegal for the firm to have that information. So really what we see on LinkedIn is what the firm sees also. So in terms of knowing whether a woman has children or not. So that's sort of my argument that, well, we can still interpret these results even if we don't know. And this sort of intention to treat of these divorce laws, right? If we see this effect and we don't even know if they're married or not, right? So.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. I just have one question about like some detail in your results.
Sure.
A great presentation. I love this. And you show that there are 2 states that women tend to switch jobs much less when they tend to have more money from their ex-husband and when they have the children custody, right? I was wondering which of these states are, which one, like which,
yes.
And you told something about they have a similarity in the divorce laws, or
yes, so they have the same classification in terms of the divorce laws. It's Washington state and Louisiana state. So that would be like Seattle, I guess, where a lot of the tech jobs are, and Louisiana, New Orleans. I don't really know what their major industry is though. So those are the 2 states that are both where you're likely to get your husband's assets and you're likely to get children. So I think if you know anything about Seattle and Washington, and then Louisiana is the South, those two states are quite different in terms of politics,
Yes,
in terms
that's
of.
what I thought. Yeah.
Mhm. So yeah, it's interesting to find that strong effect. But again, it's only 2 states, so I'm not. Maybe I don't emphasize those results very much. Just
Okay.
yeah.
Congrats again.
No, thank you.
Very interesting.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Any question?
Anyone? I have.
Okay.
Could you come back to your penultimate slide,
This one?
please? No, before. About men, I was a little bit. I think I did understand actually about what you said about children and male change position.
Yes. Okay. So that's the effect of the childcare costs. So I don't show this. I actually don't show this on these slides. I think in the appendix of the paper you can see those coefficients, that there's a very strong effect for men moving around a lot more if they have to pay more for, if the state has higher cost of childcare. However, I did find that relationship between maybe not a causal relationship, just some sort of weird correlation between the maternal custody and the cost of childcare. So if you remember in the just in the descriptive statistics, in states where women are more likely to have the custody of the children, the childcare costs were much higher. So that was very interesting. So there's potentially some, relationship between all of that information in terms of how the men are switching jobs.
And then it increased the probability of men switching jobs.
Yes.
Oh, it's very interesting because I read and I didn't actually get it. So
it's very interesting. I think that could be a whole different paper, right? Like childcare costs and job mobility, that sort of thing. So yeah.
I think your paper is not only about gender; it's a family economics.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
So.
Okay, anybody? Questions?
And thank you everyone for coming and for your attention, and feel free to email me if you have any other questions or comments or anything.
Okay, thank you, Julia, for being here today. Solange and I would like to thank everyone for the participation. See you all on October 30th in the next webinar. This one, I will be the panelist, and I will present a paper where I would like to, we analyze, because it's me and Paula Pereira, we analyze if HIV epidemic emergence affect the decision of marriage. So hope to see you all in the end of October. Bye-bye. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.